Welcome to Community and Code, a podcast about the human beings behind the code and the commits that power the technology that we use every day. I'm here today with Will Klein, who's a developer relations engineer at a company called North. And Will, tell us about yourself. What do you do, and what brings you to Community and Code today?
Yeah, sure. I've been a developer for about 18 years now. I've done everything from front end to full stack, worked on a lot of product. And a few years ago, during when the pandemic hit us, I decided to do a career change. I didn't think that was enough change for me, just having to work from home. But I moved into developer relations. It was something that I'd always been curious about. I'll even say that I was something that kept me away from it was, I think, expecting that I would have to go to a lot of conferences and travel a lot, which I didn't want to do with family. But I was always drawn to the idea of connecting with developers. I was really into developer education. I was always doing workshops on the side and things like that. And I took the leap, and I've been doing that for the last few years. And now I'm at North. And when I joined, I asked developers, have you heard of what we do at North? And no one had heard of it. But a lot of developers are working with payments, which is the space we're in. So I saw that as a big challenge, and I thought, why not go for it? So now I'm working in developer relations, working on developer experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, I my first experience with developer relations as sort of a role was through going to events, and in particular, and what drew me specifically to DevRel, where I am right now at Pantheon, was meeting the DevRel team in person at events. And like, I always felt like compared to like going to other sort of vendor booths at WordPress specific events, that team always seemed to sort of just get me as from my journey where I was as a developer at the time, more so than other teams. So when I was applying as an engineer at Pantheon, in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, I'll go in and I'll do WordPress things at Pantheon, and I wanted to get into producty stuff more anyway. But in the back of my mind is like, it feels like they know how to do DevRel right, and if given or when given the opportunity, that's kind of where I wanted to go. And then, yeah, the opportunity came up, and I'm here, and I, like you, like I've been doing this stuff for a lot longer than having the title, right? Like I was speaking
Yeah.
at events. I was doing, there's a company called Pluralsight that does online developer training, and I made a bunch of courses for them, sort of like LinkedIn Learning, but don't say that because that's their competitor. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely relate to a lot of that stuff. Did you see DevRel sort of in action before you chose that as a thing that you wanted to transition into?
Yeah. And I'll say my perspective was a bit skewed because most of my interaction with developer relations folks was at conferences, or seeing videos they put up online, but a lot of going to conferences. I started going to conferences back in 2011, 2013. Then I started going every year, and I started going a few times a year. I found that conferences were not only a place to learn, but a place to meet people and ask
Yeah.
questions and learn things you wouldn't otherwise just get to find reading the docs or just watching videos. You get to go have a back and forth with the engineers and the people that work on the teams, building the developer experience, building the APIs, building the libraries, writing those things. And so I got to meet a lot of great people in that way. And that was a really positive impression because those folks that would just take the time to really talk with you, sit with you. I mean, some of my favorite like stories that pop in my head is talking to an engineer at a company at a conference. And before I know it, I'm behind the table with them, looking at their code with them, talking through how they solve problems, talking through how I solve problems, those types of very like personal interactions where you're talking about the code and you're talking about like other stuff too. It's not just even the code, but like who we are as people and what we're up to. Those things really pulled me in, and it showed me that there's a very social side to software. And I'll also add that another big interaction I had was meetups. And
Mm-hmm.
initially, I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. There were a couple meetups, but there wasn't one for JavaScript, so I started that. Got to learn how to MC and do things like that, and then I moved to Denver, where there wasn't just one JavaScript meetup; there was five.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to meet a lot of people through the different communities there. So those types of interactions were always something that really like infused me with energy and gave me excitement. Like, I always think of conferences as a place I can recharge and get excited and kind of renew my energy. And that comes from the people I get to meet and the conversations I get to have.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like there's a skill involved, right? Like not all developers are the best at writing and communication and speaking and that sort of thing. It can be learned, but there's also like I found for myself like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, right? Like I wrote a lot of fiction and I wrote a lot of essays and and so I just sort of had those skills. So like I was writing blog posts and I was writing blog posts at previous agencies I worked at. So like that's an education in writing and talking and speaking and making videos and being in front of people is all part of the job. And it's not a thing that like all software engineers are super good at, and some are particularly maybe not so good at things at that, because it's not a skill it's not a muscle that they develop or need to develop. I also spent part of my history was in tech support. And that's relevant because so one of the things I did when I was doing tech support is I was doing tech support for Albertsons, the grocery chain,
Yeah.
and in particular, I was doing tech support for like the Windows computers in stores, which are usually like the manager computers, but also we supported photo kiosks when they had photo kiosks in their stores. And the photo kiosk system, we had hired these developers. We had a couple in-house people that worked on maintenance and development. We had a team in like I want to say maybe Poland, um, but um, but when I was working on that team, we had a couple developers like literally in the next room. So a customer, and then usually the photo kiosks are in like the pharmacy or whatever. So we had a pharmacy call in, or photo department call in, and like we have this problem with our kiosk, and I'd be like, okay, hold on a second, walk across the room, talk to the developers, describe what's happening. They would tell me in programmer speak, this is the problem, this is the database thing, this is what you need to do. I would then take that information and translate it into human English to the person on the phone. This is the thing that you need to do. I'm going to do a thing on this end. I'm going to log into your machine, whatever. And that's also a skill, like being the translation layer between like programmer speak into natural human English so that people that don't have a tech background can understand. Like that's a thing that is one of the reasons why I wanted to go to do DevRel is because I just know that I'm good at that translation layer because I had a long time of sort of developing that skill.
That's actually so. I had a similar experience in tech support. I was actually like a help desk IT admin at a small company for like 3 years. It's my part time gig while I was trying to get into software,
Hmm.
and a lot of that same experience, like people who are non technical having technical challenges, and if I just told them the technical problem, they wouldn't it wouldn't land. They wouldn't understand it, and they wouldn't feel good about that. And I quickly learned that figuring out how to speak in their terms and how to translate
Hmm.
it into what it really means, like what's the impact or what are we working with here? What do I need to sort through? That was always really helpful.
So
And
you said
then,
something. You said something that I think I also believed at the time, which was that you were doing tech support as a way to get into tech. Did you come to the
yeah.
same realization that I did that there is no future in tech if you continue in tech support?
Oh wow. I'm not sure if I would say that. It feels unfair to some people. I know some people that have stuck with it and are great at it. But for me, that was definitely the case. It was always a bit of a stepping stone. I wrote code as a kid, and I decided to become a developer back in 2000. I tried the college route, did that for a long time. Had to support myself, got into help desk stuff. But it was always the game, like the long game, to become a software developer full time. And if I look back, I think it took me 7 years from like starting college, trying to get a job, doing help desk till I got my first role. And even then, it was like not a great role, but it was something. And then I had to build from there.
I had the opposite experience. I made websites like on GeoCities and then off of GeoCities, and I did it as a fun sort of side creative thing. Um, and when I was in college, I had some friends who were like art majors and whatever who were doing like commercial graphic design after graduation, and it was like sucking their creativity out, right? Like they had
Mm.
no creative energy after doing all this stuff for work anymore. And so after I graduated, and I went to a college where we could create our own major. So my major is silly. It's creative arts in the digital revolution, which doesn't means a lot, but also doesn't mean a lot. And certainly not super applicable to many things. But when I graduated with that, I was like, okay, what I don't want to do is do stuff with this thing that I can do, but I do it for fun. And because I don't want it to ever feel like a job. And then at
Mhm.
some point, after doing tech support for a number of years and realizing that there's not a very good chance of me getting into like the programming side or the engineering side, or like, you know, getting super high in the career ladder or whatever for what I was doing beyond like just a higher level of support.
Mhm.
Um, that okay, I'm gonna stop doing this and just go out on my own and freelance development and see how that works for a while. And eventually I gravitated toward it was a project that I did with someone else who was a designer, and I was doing more of the back end development, and I realized, oh, I actually like doing this thing a lot. So and that sort of set the path, and that's kind of what led for me to be a developer and do WordPress development stuff and agency things and yeah. But like I always approached it, because I feel like I've always approached it with understanding and thinking about user experience at the forefront, because of working several years getting those complaints from customers about stupid user interface things. And
Yeah.
like, so I'm always thinking about how a user is going to break things. Like it's just like, or like how even a developer is going to break things. Like what are the things, to the point where sometimes I over engineer things a little bit. Um, because I'm just like, okay, what about this? And what about this? And what about this?
I have
Um,
this recurring experience with my pharmacy or my one of my doctors. Almost every time they prescribe me something, it goes to the wrong pharmacy. And I quickly figured out that I'm like, this is not a user error. They can't be making this mistake so consistently. There's got to be a problem in their UI. The application they're using has to be making this really hard. Doesn't show them what they should be shown.
right,
Things like
right.
that.
Yeah. I remember, this is totally off topic, but like the one, so there were two sort of server teams when I worked at Albertsons. There's the Windows server team and there is the Unix server team. One of the things the Unix server team was responsible for was pharmacy stuff, because all of the pharmacy stuff was still built on Unix. Um, it was a very old system, and the majority of, I mean, the Unix team didn't know Unix sysadmin stuff. There was a bunch of scripts that had been written for them, and there was like a sort of UI that was built that was probably running like a really extended bash script or something, that like had like, type 1 for this thing and type 2 for this thing, and that was powering like every pharmacy in in the chain, and it was kind of terrifying, to the point where like, the Unix team didn't actually know how to fix like system level Unix problems. They just knew how to run scripts. Hopefully that's not still the case, but like but I totally believe it when there are problems, like particularly pharmacy was like always a nightmare for a variety of different reasons. Like there's so many things that could go wrong. So yeah, that just reminded me of the interface that they were using at the time. This is probably like 10 years ago or something. But going back to the idea of speaking, I know that you talked a little bit earlier about your experience, speak like organizing meetups and speaking at events, like and sort of getting over like imposter syndrome and just like anxiety of being in front of people. Talk about like your experience and your process, and what you've learned in being in front of people.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that not a lot of developers or some developers aren't very good at communicating, and it's I think it's a really overlooked skill. And if I go back about 15 years, I was working on a small team at an agency, and I remember this. There was this meeting that was really important. It was a big project. I think our biggest project yet. And it was really important that everybody showed up and had questions and voiced, contributed to the conversation to make sure that we dialed in our plan to execute on this project, to build things. And I remember being completely choked up and quiet. And there were real challenges I needed to speak to, things I learned from past projects that I needed to bring into this conversation. And I just completely failed to do that. And at that point, it was actually something being able to talk to people and to communicate was, I'd been working on it for about 14 years at that point. And I tried to, overcome it in different ways. But I knew in that moment, here I was working as a professional, as a developer, and my anxiety, my social anxiety was still so strong and significant that it was really hindering me at work. And that wasn't fair to my team, and it definitely wasn't fair to myself. And I thought I was still kind of young, and I was thinking like, what's my career going to look like if I don't take this on, if I don't improve this? And I decided then and there, like I needed to go further and farther than I had before. And of all the things I could do, I'd done a little bit of this before, but I thought and had terrible experiences. It was public speaking. It was speaking in front of groups of people where I'm the presenter, where I'm the one talking, and everyone else is listening and everyone's looking at me. That was so hard for me at that point, even in a small group of people I'd known and worked with for a year. So I decided to really lean into that, and I started to speak at meetups, and that's where I started. And it was really hard and challenging the first few minutes as I got going, and stressful throughout. But what I found was that as I got going, I really liked thinking about how do I communicate this? How do I thought of it like a skill and an exercise of like, here's the challenge of how do I tell everyone how this works and have them walk away as better developers, understanding these things that they're not familiar with before this conversation. And that like kind of tapped into the engineer part of my brain. And so I got sucked into that challenge. And after doing that maybe a few times, I said before there weren't enough meetups in town for JavaScript, so I started my own. I started to MC them and like introduce other speakers, and of course give more talks. And I just kept giving. And then when I moved to Denver, I spoke as much as I could at any opportunity I had, and there's a lot of meetups to do that. And at some point, it flipped from I'm trying to overcome like social anxiety and fear of public speaking to I want to get better at this. Like I really enjoy this. This is a really good challenge. And if I look back, it carried over into the person to person conversations that I had. I think it was 3 years into public speaking that I went to a conference and I was meeting people and ended up joining a company from somebody I met. And the conversations that we had at the conference were a big factor in me getting that role. And it just kept going from there. And at some point, I started applying to conferences and going for that. And it's been a long time now that I've been doing this, but I think it was last fall. For the first time, I gave a talk where still a little tense in the chest. I was told that was adrenaline, but like mentally, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. I was excited, and I got to really focus on like how do I deliver this talk in the best way I can. And I mean, it is completely like I'm so happy when I talk about this or think about this because I went from a place where it was hard for me to talk to coworkers. It was hard for me to go to a restaurant and order something, or even like go to a cash register at the grocery store. And I was afraid of that small talk, that very harmless small talk that you have with a complete stranger. That there was a time when that was completely like frightening to me and made me really tense up and have anxiety. And I wouldn't say that I am still happy to get on the phone or I always want to talk to people. There's plenty of times where I don't want to talk to anyone. I want to just work on stuff and keep to myself. But when the opportunity is there and it's something like a conference or it's something like a meetup or it's something like talking to another developer like you, it gets me like I get excited about that. And it's not something I tense up about anymore.
Yeah, I definitely like it's interesting how that sort of anxiety like affects you in the body. You say I feel it right here, and like I do too. Some like I was actually recording one of these last week, and I don't know what was different because I don't feel like maybe it's just the moment or whatever, but like I still sometimes feel that like tightness right here when I'm presenting. I sort of had an opposite experience. I did theater in high school. And I did a lot of improv type stuff and like monologues and theater competitions and stuff. So like I kind of came into the world of speaking from like I would have characterized myself. I probably like since COVID especially, but even before I kind of drifted more into like the introverted part of the spectrum. But I still I would say I'm an ambivert. Like I'm kind of both.
Yeah, I like
But
that.
definitely, like in college and before, I would have characterized myself as very extroverted because I like just like being around people and being in front of people and whatever. So it was not super like a big leap to be like, yeah, I think maybe I could apply to speak at a local conference, and then from there was invited to like, hey, do you want to do classes for this thing called this online developer training thing? Okay, yeah, I'll do that for a little bit. But even in so, like I still, you get those sort of nervous jitters before you go up and there's like a million thoughts running in your brain as you're preparing, as they're introducing your name, like you're like, why can't it just be over? But I feel like when I'm finally up there, at least now, these days when I'm presenting, I feel like, I'm not talking. It's not me in front of an audience. It's just me in front of people, you
Hmm.
know? And I'm really like, I'm not like, it's not about me. It's about, so much as it's about me presenting like helping people with whatever, like talking about the thing to just be just helpful, um, and then on the flip side of that, like, if I go to like big sort of after like event after parties, right? If there's no one I know there that I can immediately kind of latch onto, I'm definitely like wallflowering and like being very like hanging out by the drinks or whatever, or by the snacks, and just like waiting for somebody that I can like, oh, okay, this person will save me.
Yeah, I also found that, I mean, when you give a talk, it's a really great social hack for not having to go make conversation. After you give a talk, everybody knows what you're interested in and they probably have questions. So you get to just go. My favorite thing to do is to go sit down where nobody else is and just wait. And even when I'm not speaking, people will come over and just, sit down next to me and just start talking or ask what I'm doing. But when you give a talk, that's just a massive social hack. And then they're
Yeah.
already, they're already dialed into what you're all about as well.
Yeah. My conference hack is during lunch going to eat with people I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's and part of that is the networking side, and part of that is like overcoming that wallflower thing. Like I know that this is a thing that I do, so I'm going to put myself in a situation where I don't know anyone at the table, and I'm not just gonna rely on the familiar faces that I know, so that I can kind of push myself and overcome that sort of social anxiety.
I had a conference. I think it was in 2021. It was my first conference after we'd all not been going to conferences for a couple of years.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I remember the first 24 hours, I didn't talk to anyone. Like I said hi to people, like getting food or at the registration desk, but I was just completely like just almost I was just completely quiet and I didn't know how to get out of my shell. I didn't think about it too much. I was just there. I was like, well, I'm here. I'm just gonna get used to being around people again. And the thing that ended up working was, I mean, I went to the talks and there was one speaker. His name was Homer Gaines. He gave a talk on accessibility, which I really liked. And I found him later on, and I started talking to him about his talk. And he just like we just hit it off, and we just started hanging out after that. I went and sat down later on. He came over to hang out some more, brought more people over, and I think that's a really good strategy when you don't know anybody. And even for me, sometimes I don't want to sit around a lot of strangers at a table. I'm not there yet. My energy's not there. I haven't acclimated. I just feel really quiet. But getting connected with like a speaker or somebody that works on something is just a really great way to tap into like, what am I interested in? What are they interested in? And then things start to flow from there a lot better.
Hmm. Yeah, it's also, I mean, I find the part of the reason why I consider myself an ambivert, especially after like learning more about like the spectrum of extrovert to introvert, is that one of the like a lot of people talk about that as like where your energy comes from,
Mm-hmm.
and that as an introvert it's very draining to have lots of social interactions. And I definitely, like, at the end of an event, after I've or even at the end of a night after I've been interacting with people all day, like, it is legitimately exhausting, especially, and if it's a multi-day event, like you get home and like I'm beat. And that's one of those things where like it's not a thing, like I don't you don't think about like interacting with human beings as being uh, like work for your body, you know. But it really can be. Yeah. What's your experience like with that?
It's what you described. Like I am absolutely drained of energy after a conference. I'm actually very thoughtful now. I'll try to give myself as much alone time before and
Yeah.
after an event, even for meetups, right? I'll try not to have a bunch of calls that day. I might take the morning off or the afternoon off and just have some quiet time, do something by myself. And then, the social event happens. I'm there. I find that sometimes my energy doesn't come to where I want it to be. I sometimes feel like I'm, very much in myself, and I'll dial that in. I'll listen to myself. And with longer events, with like conferences, I'm very strategic now about choosing one of the longer breaks and taking that time to go back to my hotel room or to go
Mm,
outside and go to a park or something like that. Maybe miss one of the talks just because I need to prioritize that for myself. Because if I don't do that, at some point, I'm going to completely just zone out,
yep.
completely crash, and not be able to, like, it's going to be really hard for me. So I prioritize making sure that I'm not overdoing it, kind of pacing myself. And then definitely prioritizing sleep, like before and after. It's definitely hard because I love going out with people after the conference, having random adventures, not just the official after parties and things like that.
Hmm.
And I at some point it's like, oh, I'm tired. It's like, all right, let's get back to bed. And then afterwards, I always take the day off afterwards if it's a conference. Like I
Hmm.
can't go back to work right away. I need time to myself, time with my family. So it's definitely a balance with that. And I'm absolutely an introvert. Like it's exactly what you described. Where do you gain or lose energy? And I lose energy around people, but I also gain it when we're talking about things that
Hmm.
are interesting. So
Yeah.
that sort of balances it a little bit. So it's tough if I'm feeling really quiet and I don't converse with anybody, because I'm not getting the energy back. I'm sort of
Hmm.
losing and just draining out of myself. But
Yep.
yeah.
Another thing that we talked about earlier, that I'd like to just throw out is you were mentioning experience with burnout. That's something um, that is adjacent to like, social anxiety and that sort of thing. But like I found myself, it was right around COVID, and it was I think it was right after COVID had started, and that happened to coincide with my father-in-law was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and we didn't know how serious it was yet. So we were like, okay, we're just going to make sure that we stay close to home. And one thing about me that I've always done is like a thing that I use to recharge is using vacation time and time off to get away and whatever. And that's a way that, and I knew going into it, at least intellectually, that okay, if I'm taking this away, then there's going to be a very strong risk of burnout. I'm going to burn out, and I told my manager that even. And then 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, I'm like in the thick of it, and I've completely forgotten that I had told myself and my manager that I was going to burn out, and I was burning out. And when you're in it, when I was in it, I I was no longer aware that that was a thing. I didn't realize that that was the thing that was going on until I was able to sort of step away a little bit. Talk about your experience with burnout and both sort of identifying and what tools you think there are for identifying and for like maybe trying to work yourself out of it.
Yeah. Burnout, I want to say, I think of it as like a career killer. It's as people who are knowledge based workers, like in a very
Mm-hmm.
creative field, like software is very creative. It's an art and a science. Like burnout can be very, very, it's the biggest obstacle I think that I've encountered in my career. Where if I am burned out, I can't work at the same level. Sometimes I can't even work at all. Like what I'm doing, it feels absolutely impossible. And I remember my first experience with burnout. This is going back to I think 2011. I didn't know I was burned out, but my performance had completely fallen off. I went from writing lots of code, building new products by myself, to I don't know why I can't ship a feature. I didn't understand it, and I couldn't explain it. The president of the company's asked me like, "Hey, what's going on?" And I didn't know. I really had no idea that I was burned out, what I was dealing
Mm-hmm.
with. And it ended up being something that I would experience again and again every 2 or 3 years, kind of almost on a regular cadence. And then right before the pandemic in 2019, I took on way too many things. And this is one of the ways I think you can burn out is you just take on too many things and you don't recognize that, you're stretching yourself thin and you're not letting go. You're saying yes to everything, which is what I did. And I think I had something like 5 or 6 major kind of things happen over the course of 3 months and some at the same time. And there was
Mm-hmm.
no rest. And by that point, I understood burnout. I knew how to recognize it. I knew that my energy was low, that doing things I used to be excited about was now hard. I wouldn't have the same energy for things I was really into. But I kept going anyway, not knowing how bad it could get. And I ended up after this, the pandemic happened in 2020, a year later, and that only made things worse with all the stress that came with that. I have a
Yep.
family. I was forced to work from home with small kids that weren't at school and all of that stuff.
Yep.
And I ended up being burned out for 3 whole years. And that was really scary because I'm
Yeah.
like, what am I going to do in my career? What am I going to do in my life if my
Yeah.
career is essentially dying? That's what it felt like. And I was very fortunate that I moved into developer relations. I made some changes, and that is something to do. I think if you're burning out, something does need to change. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
question of how much. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's not as dramatic as like a role shift. Sometimes it's a change of what you're working on or what you're focused on.
Right.
So one thing I tried, and I have tried this over the years, and it's definitely a thing that works, is I'll try to focus on things that if I have the autonomy and latitude to do so, I'll talk to my manager if I can as well. Can I work on things that I'm really into? I'm really curious about, kind of just tap into my passion and my curiosity more than, hey, you have to do these things. And I might not be that excited about it. So sometimes being a little bit selfish about that, I think in the long run can be really good. And, with a good manager, they're going to recognize, that sort of trade off with the team and what you're working on can be really beneficial. Um, but even now, I'm thinking back to last week. I've gotten better at recognizing burnout in the sense that I know where my energy's at. I know that like I'm not as productive as I normally am, or I don't have the things I'm excited about. I'm not able to dive into them the same way. I feel like I I describe it as riding the edge of burnout. So here's the challenge I have. I always want to do the best I can with whatever I'm doing. I'm a very like go 100% all the time type of person, which I know is not healthy or realistic. Um, and I try to be very strategic. Like right now, I need to take the day off, or I can sort of just show up 80% for like a Friday afternoon. But generally speaking, I want to be 100% all the time. That sounds good, but it's hard to know where 100% is. And something you
Mm.
brought up with your story is a very personal thing that was going on in your life. I think I overlooked for a long time, and I only learned this recently, that what's going on in your personal life plays into that professional side.
Yep.
And there are times when the professional side is just fine. In fact, things feel kind of easy. There's not a lot of demands, or I really like the work. But if there's a lot of stress on the personal side, which just happens with life, that can factor in. And my 100% is not where it was, before that. So it's kind of a constant like dynamic situation. I don't know what 100% is at. I'm always trying to do my best. I'm always trying to show up the best I can. So what I've learned to do is just be like really just patient with myself and like reflect on how I feel as I'm doing the work. If I'm not feeling the best, I always ask why. Like, why am I not feeling the
Mm,
best? Maybe I didn't sleep last night. That's okay. Maybe I've been doing a lot every single day, and there's a lot going on in my personal life, or maybe I'm just really I've just been doing it a while and I haven't taken a good break, or I haven't been working on stuff that I'm excited about. So that's definitely the hardest thing about burnout for me is it's very dynamic. And what burned me out, 3 years ago, might not be what hits me this time. So it's really paying attention to my energy, to how engaged I am. And you mentioned time off. Time off is a tactic, like it's a tool, but generally for me, time off has not been the tool. I remember there were times when I was burned out, really stressed, took time off. When I got back to work, that Monday morning felt like an absolute shock to my system because nothing else had changed. I was still working on the same project that I maybe wasn't excited about. So with nothing changing, that meant that I was just kind of being dipped back into like I was a frog getting boiled slowly, and I was just taken out of it and I'm back into the boiling water. This time I really feel it. So I always pay attention to that. But I always look for what needs to change. Like what's going to change in the long term. Maybe I'm going at a pace where there's certain things happening in the next month, and I really want to do them. I don't want to back off on them, but I'm going to make sure that in 3 weeks I'm going to take a week off, or I'm going to change things up and work on something different. So there's a bit of thinking ahead there of what's going to change, what can change now, but or what needs to change in a week or in a couple weeks. And it's always different what that could be.
yeah. I know that for me, when I was in the thick of burning out, I also like you said, like my performance, I didn't really see it at the time, but like that was the first time I ever got a performance improvement plan um,
Hmm.
from my manager, which like also like that didn't help. It didn't help my
That is so
my
stressful. Yeah.
mental state. And I also like at the time I couldn't articulate what was going on, but and that led me into like imposter syndrome is a thing that I think everybody struggles with at different times, and certainly like it's relevant to speaking as much as it's relevant to even just entering a new role at a new company. But like at that point, my imposter syndrome turned into what if I can't do this anymore? What if I can't be a developer anymore? What if like the demands that are evolving as the space changes? What if I just can't keep up? And what if that like I can't cut it anymore? Like what does that mean for me? And like there's so much I feel like too in particularly in like our current culture that where like there's so much tied up in identity in what you do, and for certainly at that point like so much of who I saw myself as a person was tied to the thing that I was doing, and maybe part of coming out of that and part of the recovery process is realizing that there is the thing that I do and that is separate from who I am as a human being. And going back to COVID too, like one of the outlets that I had, even in the midst of burnout, was I got really deeply into Dungeons and Dragons, and role playing. And to the point where like I'd been running a campaign for my kids before COVID, and then when we stopped meeting in person, I realized, oh, like there's a part of me that like needs this outlet, like there needs this escape or needs something here, and I like yeah, we started running a game just with me and my partner and my and our kids, and then we moved our game online, and I got deeper and deeper into it, and now I'm just like that's the thing, that's my identity outside of work, but like yeah, it's important to like create those boundaries. There's a an Instagram and probably TikTok guy. I never can remember his name. He's an Indian guy, and he does these like sort of like faux motivational videos, but the basic premise is like essentially like fuck your job, fuck your
I
boss,
know who you're talking about.
like
He's amazing.
yeah, because like but it's all about like that separation between like what you do in the 8 hours a day that you are doing a thing for someone else and getting for money and whatever. That is not who you are. And like I feel like I sometimes I need to hear that. That's why I love his stuff so much, because like you need those reminders to like know like you are not your job.
Hmm.
And everybody out in like the rat race and the market and like everyone out there wants you to believe, and certainly your employer wants you to believe that you are your job, but no, you are a human being who happens to be performing a service for these people and they are paying you for it. But at the end of the day, I get to walk away, and that ain't me. That's not, I can go and be a dungeon master or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I'm reminded like back earlier in my career, I would get Stockholm syndrome at like a not great situation, and like I would be just so bought in and tied to it and focused on it. And I love what you said about like I actually can't. I have a hard time teasing out the being a developer is such a part of my identity because I'm very
Mm.
mastery oriented. Like I love to learn things and get good at them. Like that is part of who I am. So one of the biggest ways I do that is through software development. But at the same time, like knowing that that's not the only thing, knowing that I'm a father, that I'm a teammate on my hockey team, that I have, friends and different friend groups and different things, leaning into those things and knowing that my identity is spread out across all these different things is like, it definitely helps. And um, I always hate the line like we're family at work, right? And I think we've all woken up
Oh
to like
yeah.
how toxic that can be. And
Yeah.
it can sometimes be very well intentioned. I've learned that what you do have at work that can be very healthy is community. You can have
Hmm.
friends at work, you can have a community at work, and an ideal workplace is just that. It's a really good community, and thinking of it that way is really helpful.
Yeah, I had a boss that uh, well, CEO of the company, but boss, uh, who said that he never hired people he didn't want to hang out with. Um, and like, it sounds good, right? It sounds
Yeah,
nice. And certainly when I worked there, we as a team, as like coworkers, were really tightly knit. But like you said, the flip side of that is like feeling like you've let family or you've let these people down, or you stay longer than maybe you need to, or you take less money than maybe you deserve because you're part of this family or this friend group that it's I mean it's not really a friend group. I mean, you can have friends that come out of work, and I have some of my best friends that came out of that team. But but it's also not. It's and
yeah,
it's good to be able to make the distinction between like being like being friends or friendly with people that you work with because you like them as humans, and being like friends or friendly with people because of this sort of forced community because of like proximity and and like and having like expectations, like loyalty expectations related to that. Like again, like
yeah,
it took me a really long time to come to the conclusion, or to realize that the idea that you don't owe your employer anything. They owe you. Like you're doing
mhm,
a service for them. They're not providing a service like by giving you a job. They're not providing a service to you. You are providing a service to them, and that's a thing that like I certainly didn't know, or wouldn't have articulated. And like it was always like as a teenager, and first few things like you're 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 begging to get a job, right? Or you're just desperate to have anything, right?
mhm,
Um, but but it's an important sort of like mental shift to get to the headspace of like no, I'm providing a service to you, and what goes along with that is being able to like value yourself and your like the things that you bring to the table, that can help with like, you know, the whole like recruiting and interview process. Like if you know that like I'm giving you a service and these are the things that I uniquely have that I can offer you, then it shifts the scale in terms of like sort of who holds the power, and like and that's a really important and under discussed skill and concept, I think.
Yeah, I learned the hard way that being loyal to a company is not a good idea. It's very unhealthy, and anytime I did that, I think I was burned. Um, I think loyalty can be earned though. Like I've learned being loyal to a company might be wrong, but being loyal to people that have earned it on the
For
other
sure.
side, like that, I do believe in. You know, I've
Yeah.
worked with colleagues and teammates and managers and leaders who I've learned like they're showing up for me, like they're showing loyalty to me. In fact, you know, they're prioritizing me or the team, and you know that type of loyalty can definitely be earned. And then, but even still, like it can be hard, but I try to balance that loyalty with like what do I need as well. And you know, I think I'm almost always kind of thinking about that a little bit of like I'm really loyal to them, or I really like what we're doing, but is this the right thing for me? It is. Okay,
Hmm.
cool. Or maybe not. Maybe something needs to change and it's something I need to revisit. And doesn't necessarily mean moving to a different team or a different company, but if you're not paying attention to that, then you can very much end down a path that you didn't intend to be, and you've been somewhere for 3 or more years, and you're just not happy and you don't even know where you want to go next.
Yeah.
So I try to think about that very proactively. You mentioned something else about working with people you want to be friends with. One thing I've loved about some of the teams I've been on is that I've made friends with people I wouldn't otherwise be friends with.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember there's a team I joined one time where I wasn't even interested in this. I wasn't that interested in this company. They were like number 4 on my list. And then I went to the interview, and I remember going to lunch, and they brought the whole team out, and it was a very there were mobile engineers, web engineers, designer, PM, all that were at the lunch. There's 10 of us, and I remember looking around the table, and everybody seemed very different. There's different ages, different genders, different backgrounds, different educate types of education, career changers. People who've been doing software since they were a kid, like all of that. And like everyone here is so unique, but I saw how they all talk to each other, and I saw like there was a lot of they were very comfortable with each other, and they were talking like they were friends. And that was one of the best teams I ever worked on, looking back, and I could see it in the
Yeah.
lunch and how everybody talked to each other. So I really like that about work. I like the idea of finding people that are not like you, that
Yeah.
don't communicate like you, that disagree with you, and that
Yeah.
is
Absolutely.
that makes like work so much more interesting. The end result, of course, is much better, but
Hmm.
that gives me an opportunity as a person to like learn so much more about other humans and other different experiences. And I mean, of course, I get to do the thing, but like selfishly, I enjoy that. Hanging out with different people that I otherwise wouldn't, and work is a phenomenal way to facilitate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point of like the value of building teams with people that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily think of yourself as hanging out with, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I think there's so many social constructs built around like you want to find people who think like you, who have similar ideas and similar backgrounds and whatever, and you are drawn to those people naturally and organically. But it's even more valuable, and particularly it's been proven from like a work performance standpoint that teams with people with diverse backgrounds perform better because you have those different influences and different backgrounds and different stories, and like you can very easily, if you just hire people that that think like you, um, fall into a pattern of just creating a sort of a monoculture,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not consciously uh, choosing people or finding people who are distinctly different from your perspective. I know as a I was organizing WordCamp Salt Lake City for a number of years, and one of the things that I was very conscious of was in tech spaces. The status quo is a lot of male speakers, a lot of white male speakers, and I really wanted to be conscious to have a diverse speaker lineup. And what that meant was, okay, well, if I don't get the speaker applications that support that, I'm going to go out and talk to people that I know will represent these other voices. And a lot of them said yes. And that was
Mhm.
all it meant. And that was the only thing I needed to do to have, like, a 50-50 split between male and female speakers,
Yeah,
um,
I I had a very
just
similar
being
experience with
intentional.
being intentional. Yeah, I when I organized a meetup, we got up to we had we had one speaker every month, or maybe two sometimes, but we had our community, and it had been going. It was a React Denver, and I got to do this for I think about 7 years. And I looked at who was speaking. I mean, it was mostly white men at first. Most of the people signing up and volunteering were people that felt comfortable doing so, and so forth. And I found that whenever somebody that was different, like say a woman or a person of color, came and spoke, I would see in the audience a reflection of the speaker. I would see people that were in the community but were not coming to our meetup show up for the first time and attend. So I also did outreach. I reached out to people that I would see just asking questions about writing tests with a certain library. I'm saying, and I would go out to them and say, hey, you're asking really good questions about this. Would you like to come give a talk about what you're learning? Things like that. And it was really hard to I'd strive for like a 50-50 ratio of like male to
Mm-hmm.
non-male. I couldn't even get there, but I saw those, it took effort. You said that that's the only thing you need to do. It's actually a lot of work, and it's a lot of effort, but it's so impactful because
Mm-hmm.
so many different people came to the community. And that's not just beneficial to those few people to feel like they're welcome, or there's people like them at the meetup, but for everybody else already attending, now the community gets to grow and you get to meet different people, and everybody benefits from that. So I still see this with some events where there's that seems to not come into play. I often look at usually there's like four to six speakers announced early,
Mm-hmm.
and that's gotten a lot better. But once in a while, I saw this last week. It was just all men. As the early announced speakers, and I've talked to people that affects who ends up applying to speak at this
Yep.
conference. It kind of skews
Yep.
things. And I've also seen the opposite. I've seen I'm actually wearing the shirt right now. I'll just call them out. Way Web. They're in Spain, and they do a couple different conferences. Jay on the Beach, Lambda Conf is a functional conference coming up. Their CFP is open, and then Way Web is like for UI and UX. I remember seeing their lineup, and I think it was 5 women and 1 man in the initial early announced speakers, and I was like, that's very different.
That's a conference I want to go to.
I know, right? Like they're just like really working on that and paying attention to that. And I look back, and the previous year, most of their speakers were female, and it was the case again last November. I literally applied to their conference saying, "Hey, I actually hadn't spoken in a while at a conference, but here's an old idea I have. I just really think your event's great, and I want to be a part of it." They reached out to me based on that, just knowing that I was bought into what they were doing
Mm-hmm.
and the type of a community they were fostering. And I ended up giving a talk and 2 workshops. It was the most I ever spoken at a conference, and it was a great experience. Really great organizers. The community there was super welcoming. There's a lot that can be said for organizers that really pay attention to how their community is represented, and how they welcome people. And it really shows up in the experience when you go there, and you feel like I felt so comfortable there. I was in a different country. I didn't know the language, and there's a lot of people I didn't know. I think I didn't. The one person I think was going to know. Oh, I knew one person that was there, but it was such a different community than what I was used to, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, we're getting close to time, but I feel
Yeah.
like that reminds me of like sort of my best or favorite conference experiences is when AlterConf was a thing. And if you don't know, AlterConf was minority, underrepresented,
Wow.
diverse, trans voices, basically like everyone that doesn't fall into the white male tech stereotype, right? So like
Hmm.
everything else, and there is uh, one of my favorite talks on a subject I never would have even imagined was how colonialism affects typography, like the font, like fonts and like the ISO like standards and
Yeah.
whatever, just and some of them were very personal stories about like how like stuff that they had to do or not do or like their experience just in work environment, and it was just like going as a white male mask presenting person ally, just sitting and listening to these stories just was so deeply like it changed how I saw myself and the world around me. And it's unfortunate, speaking of burnout, that the organizers who were running it for many years burnt out on running the event and it no longer exists. But all those talks are online, which is great. Um, but but yeah, it's really vital to have spaces for just other stories that are not the the typical stories in the tech space. Um, yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we could go on for forever. But Will, thanks for being on the show. Where can people find you online? What do you do, and do you have anything that you want to plug?
Yeah.
Now's your space.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find all my socials on my website at willklein.co. And if you ever want to work with payments in the payments industry, I work at north.com. You can go to north.com and click on developers. And we're working to be the easiest payments company to work with. And it's a lot of fun learning about how to do things in that space. That's very interesting to me right now, and excited to improve the developer experience there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, and see you all next time.
Thanks, Chris. See ya.